Hello again. Today I'd like to read the second installment of a series of blog posts I wrote a while back. This one's called Vero Amore. I built a boat. To this day, it's still the best model I ever built. Sure, it's no masterpiece, but I cut and glued every popsicle stick with the utmost care. I filled the cracks and shaved and sanded for hours. When it was ready to be painted, I handed it over to one of the most talented artists I've ever had the good fortune to know. After I had decided on a color scheme, it was time to pick out the right name. It took me some time to decide, but one day in a fluster of inspiration, I had it. Vero Amore. True love. Call me a sentimentalist. Perhaps I was, perhaps I am. Either way, there was no way I could have known at the time the journey I would take to understanding what I believe that phrase really means. I have an idea floating around in my head. It might be naive, oversimplified, and definitely idealistic. It's probably fair to say that most of us have, at one time, had an occasion to watch a movie or read a book or poem from the genre of romance. In all likelihood, a lot of us grew up around fairy tales such as Cinderella, Snow White, etc. Of course, the men in our midst most likely have much less exposure to such classics than the average Western woman. The culture portrayed in these works, however, are certainly an accurate picture of the ideal that children have grown up with for decades and even centuries. You know the story. Guy meets girl, and through some series of events, inevitably fall in love. Some writers' conception of a beautiful romance ensues, and happily ever after is implied, if not stated outright. Don't get me wrong, I'm not writing off fairy tales. There's a place for fantastical dialogue within every culture. Where we, as a culture, might have gone wrong is that we seem to think that the fantasy ought to be the ideal. Chances are we've all seen or heard the statistics. Marriages fail at a rate of 40 to 50%, other relationships at much higher rates. Extramarital affairs often end in single-parent households that face tremendous struggles. A society becomes a place of hurting and broken people, and yet somehow we still hold on to the fantasy that perhaps the next one will be that Prince Charming, Snow White, the one. Here's my idea. What if we have it all wrong? What if the fact that we're basing most of our relationships on the laws of attraction, emotional connection, and/or commonality is the very reason for such a colossal fail rate? Think about it. The amount of responsibility both parties in the relationship are putting on each other in this case is astronomical. There are expectations in place that no human could fail to fall short of. In short, I think the problem is that we in the Western world have, in our quest to find the one, lost all sense of what true love really is. So what's the answer? I'm not sure, but I've spent some time forming a hypothesis based, in part, on the ancient practice of arranged marriage. I realize it's hopelessly idealistic, but perhaps it can be a baseline for better relationships. There are many flaws with arranged marriages, of course, a lot of which are most likely caused by self-serving and/or indifferent parents, but there are also some good principles by design. The main one I would like to address here is basing marital relationships on decision instead of emotional or romantic connection. In general, it all starts with the parents making the decision that it is time for their son or daughter to be married. The parents find what they deem to be a suitable mate for their child, and the pair weds. The success rate with this method is astounding. 6% fail rate. Obviously, there are cultural implications with that statistic as well, but the point I'm trying to make is this. A relationship built on commitment and purpose is the only one likely to succeed. Of course, all this is not to say that commonality and connection is not important to some extent. There are aspects in which a relationship will not flourish without some level of compatibility between both parties. But these things are not a part of the ultimate equation for success. They are merely enhancements or embellishments to the foundation. Perhaps Vero Amore is much more complex than a written definition. At least I know I'm personally not qualified to attempt it. What I do know is that I've seen it. I've also seen a lot of failure, and it's given me this notion of an ideal in which relationships were not based on attributes or feelings, but rather decision, commitment, and purpose. In fact, I might even suggest that there is an aspect in which true love ought to exist in friendly relationships in a different capacity, but I will leave that for a different discussion. Until next time, ciao.